Welcome to Revenge with Luna. I bought my first apartment without telling anyone. My sister used the spare key I gave her for emergencies to move her whole family in. A neighbor texted me photos the day I was supposed to get the keys. That's when I called 911. My name is Zoe Hartley. I'm 31. And if you think you know how this ends, you don't. What do you do when the one person you trusted with a spare key decides that trust was an invitation? The photo came in at 11:42 in the morning. I was sitting in the parking lot of my office building, eating a sandwich, scrolling through nothing, just decompressing before my afternoon shift. The text was from my neighbor, the older woman in 4B who had agreed to keep an eye on the place before I moved in. She'd signed for packages twice already. I thought she was just being sweet. The photo showed my living room, a child's backpack on my floor, a stroller folded against my freshly painted wall. An open pizza box on the kitchen counter I had picked out myself, stood in a showroom for 40 minutes choosing the white marble finish I had never let myself have before, because for years I could never afford before. I stared at the screen so long, my sandwich went warm in my hand. There was a second photo. My sister standing in front of my window, the one that looks out over the courtyard, the one I had specifically chosen this unit for, holding a coffee mug like she lived there. Like she'd always lived there. She was smiling. I had worked for that apartment for 4 years. Not metaphorically. Literally 4 years of double shifts at the hospital, 3 years as a floor nurse, and then 1 brutal year as charge nurse where I ate dinner standing up most nights and cried in my car twice a month from sheer exhaustion. I skipped my friend's bachelorette trip to Cancun. I drove a car with a cracked bumper for 2 years because repairs weren't in the budget. I brought lunch every single day, and I tracked every dollar in a notebook, the paper kind, because somehow seeing the numbers by hand made the sacrifice feel real and intentional rather than just deprivation. The down payment took everything I had. Nobody knew. My parents didn't know. My sister definitely didn't know. I'd kept the whole process so private that even my closest friend only found out the week before closing. I wasn't being secretive out of drama or distrust. I just knew my family. I knew how the news would land. I knew there would be opinions and suggestions and questions about whether I really needed so much space and whether I'd considered helping out more at home first. I knew my sister would make it about herself somehow. She always did. So I kept quiet and I closed the deal and I gave my neighbor in 4B my number and I asked her to keep an eye out. I gave my sister a spare key 3 weeks before closing because she lived 20 minutes away. And I genuinely, stupidly thought that in an emergency, it would be useful to have someone nearby who could get in. Emergency. Like a burst pipe. Like a gas smell. Like I locked myself out. Not like my sister and her husband and her 2 kids need somewhere to stay while their lease runs out. I called her from the parking lot. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been expecting the call. "Hey," she said, voice perfectly casual. "Like nothing. What are you doing in my apartment?" A pause. Short but deliberate. "I was going to tell you. We've been having a really hard time with the lease situation, and Marcus thought—" "I didn't ask about Marcus. I asked what you were doing in my apartment." Her voice shifted, softened into the register she uses when she wants to sound reasonable while doing something unreasonable. "Zoe, we needed somewhere to go, just for a little while. You weren't even there yet. It's not like you were using it. I wasn't using it. I had not yet spent a single night in the apartment I had spent 4 years saving for, and I was not yet using it. You need to leave," I said. "Today." "That's not—" "Zoe, that's so dramatic. We're family. You have a 2-bedroom. We're not hurting anything." "Today," I said again. And then I hung up and called the non-emergency police line and told them I had people in my property who had entered without my permission and were refusing to leave. The dispatcher asked if I knew the individuals. I looked at the photo again. My sister's smile. My mug in her hand. I hadn't even moved in yet, so she must have brought it herself. Which somehow made it worse, the comfort of it, the settling in. "Yes," I said. "I know them. I drove there with the folder I keep in my glove compartment. Lease documents, closing papers, my ID. Every nurse learns early to keep documentation, chart everything. Date everything. You will need it later." The officer was already at the door when I arrived. My sister had opened it and was doing the thing she does, the warm smile, the reasonable voice, hands slightly open at her sides like she was performing peacefulness. "This is a family misunderstanding," she was saying. "She gave me a key." "For emergencies," I said, "from the bottom of the stairs. Not to move in." She looked at me and I watched something flicker across her face. Not guilt, more like recalculation. The officer asked for documentation of ownership. I handed over the folder without a word. He looked through it, looked at my sister, looked back at me. "Ma'am, you'll need to vacate the premises. We have children," she said. "I understand that. You'll still need to leave." Her husband appeared behind her then, Marcus, who I had never particularly liked and who had never particularly tried to make me like him. He looked at me with something close to contempt. "This is unbelievable," he said. "She's your sister." "She's trespassing," I said, and I was surprised at how steady my voice was. I didn't feel steady. My hands were doing something strange, and there was a pressure in my chest like the beginning of crying, except I wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. They left. It took 40 minutes, and most of it was my sister making pointed comments to her children about how some people don't understand what family means, loud enough for me to hear from the hallway where I stood with the officer. I cataloged every word. After they drove away, I stood in my apartment for a long time. The pizza box was still on my counter. The child's backpack had left a small scuff on the baseboard near the door. One of my windows was open that I hadn't left open. These were small things. I know they were small things, but I had imagined walking into this apartment for the first time alone, on my own terms, in my own time. And instead, my first memory of it was standing in the doorway watching a police officer wait while my sister packed her kids' things into a laundry bag. I ordered Thai food, sat on the floor because I had no furniture yet, and ate in the quiet. The quiet was mine, at least. My phone started ringing at 8 that night. My mom, then my dad, then my mom again. I let them go to voicemail. My mother's message was 11 minutes long. The version I heard later, replaying it once while I made coffee, went through 3 distinct phases: confusion, because she hadn't known about the apartment; betrayal, because I hadn't told her; and anger, because of what I had done to my sister. In that order. My secrecy was the first offense. My sister's trespassing was a distant second, barely mentioned and framed as desperation rather than choice. My father called again at 10. His message was 2 sentences. "Your mother is very upset. You need to call your sister and apologize. Apologize." I set my phone face down on the floor next to my takeout container and looked at the ceiling of my apartment, which had a small water stain near the light fixture that the previous owners had disclosed and I had noted and accepted, and which I now found somehow comforting in its plainness. This was mine, water stain and all. I did not call my sister. What I did instead was open my laptop and pull up the building's security app. The cameras covered the lobby, the elevator, and the hallway outside my unit. I started with the day I'd signed the lease and given her the key. She had been inside the apartment 9 times in 3 weeks. 9 times. I sat with that number for a while. 9 visits to an apartment she had a spare key to in case of emergency. I watched her on the lobby camera, walking in with her husband on visit number 4, both of them carrying bags. On visit number 6, she had the kids with her. On visit number 8, the night before the day my neighbor texted me, she came in alone, stayed for 2 hours, and left with what looked like a measuring tape in her hand. She had been measuring my apartment. I saved every clip, labeled by date and time, and uploaded them to a folder in my cloud storage. Then I texted my neighbor in 4B to say thank you and asked if she'd be willing to write a brief statement about what she'd observed. She said yes without hesitation. She added a note. "I saw them in the hallway with luggage 2 days ago. I almost texted you then. I'm sorry I waited." "Don't be sorry," I wrote back. "You helped me." 3 days later, my sister showed up at my workplace. I found out from a colleague who came to find me between patients, expression carefully neutral, saying there was someone in the lobby asking for me. I walked out and there she was, in a blazer she only wears when she wants to seem put together, holding 2 coffees from the place I used to love. "I thought we could talk," she said. I looked at the coffees. This was a move I recognized. Our whole lives she had used small gestures to soften big wrongs. A candy bar after she broke something of mine, a compliment before she asked to borrow money. Now 2 cups of coffee outside my hospital, as though the right beverage could undo the footage of her measuring my living room for furniture she planned to put there. I'm at work, I said. I know, Zoe, come on. Mom and Dad are devastated. The kids keep asking when they're going back to Aunt Zoe's apartment. She paused on Aunt Zoe's apartment in a way that was probably meant to sound endearing and landed somewhere near threat. We were only there because we had nowhere else to go. Marcus lost the job. We've been behind on rent for months. I didn't know how to ask you. So instead of asking, you used the key. I panicked. You measured the rooms. Her face did something complicated. I have it on camera, I said. I have it on camera, I said. I have all of it on camera. Every visit, the luggage, the measuring tape. She went very still. I'm not asking you to explain it, I said. I'm telling you so that you understand the position you're in if this goes further. I have documentation. I have a police report. I have a witness statement from my neighbor. If you or Marcus makes any claim on that apartment, in court, to the family, anywhere, I will use all of it. She stared at me. I watched her recalculate again, the same look she'd had in the doorway, except this time there was something underneath it that I hadn't seen before. Fear, maybe, or just the reality of being caught. I can't believe you're doing this to your own family, she said, and her voice had gone soft and bruised in the way it gets when she's decided she's the victim of the situation. I didn't do anything to you, I said. I just stopped letting you do things to me. I handed her back the coffee she'd held out toward me, untouched. I have to go back to my patients. That evening, I filed for a formal change of locks and removed her from any authorized entry in the building system. I also drafted a letter to my family, not to send yet, just to have, outlining the full timeline with documentation attached. Every date, every camera timestamp, every savings deposit and mortgage payment that proved this was mine and mine alone. My parents called a family dinner 2 weeks later. I knew before I walked in that it would be a negotiation. The table was set formally, which my mother does when she wants something to feel official. My sister and Marcus were already seated when I arrived. My sister had dressed the kids in nice clothes, which I noted because it was calculated. Hard to have a frank argument about property rights when there are children in button-down shirts looking at you over the mashed potatoes. My father spoke first. He had clearly prepared remarks. We think, he said, that given the circumstances, the family should come together around a solution. Your sister's family is struggling. You have a 2-bedroom apartment. There's a reasonable arrangement here if people are willing to talk. I had brought the folder. I set it on the table. This is the closing documentation, I said. Mortgage in my name, down payment from my account accumulated over 4 years, no family contribution. I have bank statements if anyone wants to see them. My mother said, this isn't about money, it's entirely about money, I said. It's about the fact that I earned this, and I own it, and I am not required to share it because someone else is having a hard time. I'm sorry they're having a hard time, but that is not something I created, and it's not something I should have to fix by giving up my home. You're so cold, my sister said quietly. Marcus leaned forward. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for family solidarity. Family solidarity doesn't mean I give you my apartment, I said. If it meant anything, it would have meant you asked me before you used my key. It would have meant a phone call, not a moving truck. My mother's eyes were filling. This was a technique too, one I had spent years unable to resist. The tears that meant you are hurting me by refusing to be hurt. I looked at them, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not cruelty, but clarity. The same clarity I feel sometimes at 3 a.m. in an understaffed ward when the situation is serious and there's no room for anything except what's true and what's needed. I love all of you, I said. And I am not going to sign anything, agree to anything, or move anyone into my apartment. That's final. My father said, if you walk out of here, don't expect. I know, I said. I picked up the folder and left. The following weeks were quiet in the way that things are quiet when they're waiting to become loud again. My sister posted on social media, I found out through a mutual friend, a series of soft focus photos of her kids in their rental, captions about resilience and how some family bonds weren't as strong as you believed. The comments were full of people expressing sympathy without knowing any context, and a few that were clearly aimed at me even without using my name. I screenshotted everything. Not out of spite, out of habit. Documentation. The nurse's reflex. And then something happened that I hadn't expected. My cousin called me. She's older, lives across the state, and we're not close in the way people mean when they say close. We don't talk often, but she'd heard things through the family channel and she called to say, simply and directly, I know what your sister is like. I know what they're like. I just wanted you to know someone sees it. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and I cried a little, not from sadness, from relief, from the specific relief of being seen by someone who had no reason to take your side except that they believed you. The restraining order came through on a Thursday. Formal, court-issued, specific. My brother-in-law had sent me 2 messages that my attorney described as crossing a line. One threatening to contest my ownership through a family property claim. One that was harder to characterize but unmistakably menacing. The judge agreed. I held the document in my apartment that evening. I had finally gotten furniture, a couch, a bed, a small dining table. The water stain near the light fixture was still there. I'd decided not to fix it. I made tea and sat by the window that looks over the courtyard, and I thought about the 4 years that had led to this room. The skipped trips. The paper notebook. The lunches I packed at 6 in the morning before anyone else was awake. I thought about the night I signed the closing papers, alone, at a conference table with my real estate agent and a notary, shaking hands that I held perfectly still because I was not going to let anyone in that room know how much it meant to me. I had wanted this to be a quiet victory. Mine and no one else's. I had wanted to move in on a Saturday morning with music playing and no drama and maybe a plant in the window by afternoon. Instead, I had a police report and the restraining order and a family that had shown me very clearly exactly what it thought I was for. But I also had this apartment. I had the key, which I had changed. I had the deed, which had my name. I had the window and the courtyard below it, and the light that came through in the late afternoon and fell in long rectangles across the floor I had chosen. Some people are going to love you most when you have nothing to give them and nothing to protect. My sister loved me like a resource. My parents loved me like a responsibility they had already discharged. Neither of those is the love that holds. I know that now. I turned on a lamp, opened a book I'd been meaning to read for 8 months, and sat in the quiet of my own home until it was time to sleep. My neighbor in 4B brought me a small succulent a week later with a note that said, "Congratulations on your home, you earned it." I put it on the windowsill. It is still there. If you're watching this because something in my story sounds familiar, because you've spent years giving and sacrificing and being told that love means you never say no, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to build something that belongs entirely to you. You are allowed to keep it. You are allowed to stand in the doorway of the thing you earned and say mine, without apology and without guilt and without flinching. The people who love you for you will still be there. The rest will show you who they are the first moment you stop giving them what they want. Let them. And then lock the door. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you next time. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to build something real. Not just the money, though that part was brutal enough, the years of packed lunches and skipped trips and a cracked bumper I drove around with for so long, I stopped seeing it. I mean the internal architecture of it, the daily decision to keep going when nothing around you confirms that you're on the right path yet. Nobody claps for you when you transfer money into a savings account on a Tuesday night. Nobody notices. You just do it, and then you do it again, and eventually the numbers mean something. What I didn't expect was that the hardest part wouldn't be the saving. It would be what happened after. I've gone back and forth on why my sister did what she did. Not to excuse it, I stopped trying to do that pretty early, but just to understand it. I think she genuinely believed on some level that what was mine could be shared without asking, that the relationship entitled her to access, and I think that belief came from years of me not pushing back. Every time I let something slide, every time I absorbed the cost of her choices quietly and didn't make a scene, I was teaching her something. I was teaching her that I would absorb it, that I would make room, that the line would move if she leaned on it. The spare key wasn't the beginning of this story. It was just the moment the pattern finally had a paper trail. There's something I keep coming back to, and it's this. Actions compound. Not in any mystical sense, just in the plain, observable way that choices build on each other over time. My 4 years of discipline compounded into a deed with my name on it. Her 4 years of taking compounded into a situation where she was standing in a stranger's apartment, mine, with a measuring tape, planning a life in a space she had never earned a single square foot of. Both of those outcomes were logical. Both of them were the direct result of repeated choices. Zoe, the person who saved in the notebook, and Zoe, the person who stood in the doorway with the folder and didn't flinch. Those weren't two different people. One made the other possible. That's what nobody tells you about integrity. It's not one dramatic moment. It's the accumulation of small, unwitnessed choices that determine who you are when the dramatic moment finally arrives. I'm not angry anymore. I want to be honest about that because I think the story could suggest I am, and it would be easy to read it that way. What I feel when I think about my sister now is something closer to grief, for what a different set of choices could have made us to each other. She had a real problem. She could have called me. She could have asked, and I might have helped, genuinely, in a way that was chosen rather than taken. We'll never know now. That possibility closed the day she walked into my apartment with a key that was not an invitation. What I know is this: the apartment is mine. The quiet in it is mine. The water stain near the light fixture that I decided to keep is mine. And none of that was given to me. All of it was built, one unclapped Tuesday at a time, by someone who decided that what she was working toward was worth the years it would take to get there. That's the only version of this story I know how to tell.